Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you are currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps along your journey. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now, let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Things are getting a bit criticulous. I feel like I need Chris Rock or Kevin Hart or some comedian to be my voiceover on this so I can really give accent to this word, but things are getting a bit criticulous. In an earlier podcast, you heard me talk about the fact that we live in a participatory world, that people right now in our lives, in our work, everywhere we go in the world, that people are eager and thirsty to participate. And in fact, so many of us, our mode of operation in the world is to participate. And so we need to be thoughtful about bringing people in our teams and in our organizations, in our lives. We need to bring them in to help them have a voice, to feel connected, to participate in solutions, in positivity, in moving things forward so that they share in the creation of whatever it is that we're involved in. But the danger of this participatory world, if I want to talk about maybe the dark side of this participatory world, the danger is that we live into these habits that sometimes in a participatory world can begin to go down the path of criticism, of blame, of pointing fingers, rather than a support of solutions and of bringing positive action to something. Without knowing it, we can slip into a criticulous mindset where it's easy to sit back and criticize and poke holes into anything and everything. And in fact, that's really easy. In today's world, it's really easy to hit the send button, to push something out on social media, to sit back and be a critic. And yet, all of a sudden, we get swept up into this mode of thinking, acting, and interacting where things get quite criticulous, where we're just criticizing anything and everything. And if we're not proactive with our mindset, like that thermostat that we talk about all the time, if we're not proactive with that thermostat, then it's easy to slip into reactionary mode, like that thermometer. And all of a sudden, everything we see and everywhere we look, we start to become a critic and feel like our job to participate is to just poke holes in things. We see this across social media, and we certainly see this in teams and organizations where it's easy to sit back in the cheap seats, sit back behind a group of people and criticize everything that ought to be happening, but being unwilling to step forward, to be a positive change maker, to be about solutions, and to be about owning your own behavior, your own actions, and helping be a part of going on the journey to find solutions with others. So we have to be careful in this participatory world that we don't let our minds and we don't let our actions and our interactions slip in this criticulous mindset. If you remember after this last season's Super Bowl, the NFL Super Bowl, the biggest game in the world, where millions and millions of people around the world gather around TVs across the globe to watch this football game, never more did I see this criticulous behavior, this criticulous mindset creeping in. Then this was the greatest example of this surrounding last year's Super Bowl. If you remember, it was the Los Angeles Rams and the New England Patriots. And the Patriots, who have become this team that you either love or you hate because of their success over the years. And then this team from Los Angeles that's moved there recently, the Rams, that there was a lot of excitement around this Super Bowl. And the New England Patriots ended up winning a game 13-3 in a game that was a one-touchdown game for almost the entire game. Well, in fact, for the entire game, it was a one-touchdown game. So it was a close game, but it wasn't exactly, the cleanest game. In some people's reflections, it was a bit sloppy, but the game was a one-touchdown even game for the entire game. But if you remember what the crowd, the masses, the commentators, that what everyone was talking about after the game, the outlash on social media and all the television shows, everything, in fact, everything surrounding the game, nothing seemed to be good enough. The game wasn't good enough. People thought that it was too sloppy, that the teams didn't play well enough, that it wasn't creative enough, that it wasn't exciting enough. Everything about the game is everyone sat back and was a critic. The game wasn't good enough. The commercials weren't good enough. Across social media and on all the news programs after the game and the next morning, everything was talking about how the commercials weren't as creative as they used to be. They weren't as good. Maroon 5, who was the halftime performer, wasn't good enough. Everybody talked about and began their rankings of the best halftime shows, and everybody talked about how Maroon 5 wasn't good enough. And then there was this, tremendous noise out there around should he or shouldn't he, Adam Levine, that is, the lead singer of Maroon 5, should he or should he have not taken off his shirt as a part of his, and everybody sat back and was a critic. Everybody from beyond was criticizing, and this entire black storm around this game, this feeling, this spirit that nothing was good enough, and everyone was a critic. As I watched this happening and watched this storm around the Super Bowl, this mindset seeping in, this habit that we were all feeding of being a critic, it got me thinking about the quote from Wayne Dyer. The famous Wayne Dyer who said, "What you think about, you bring about. What you think about, you bring about." Or in my words, if you've heard me speak or you've read my books or watched things that I talk about, oftentimes I talk about this idea of where we look is where we go. Where you look, what you give your eyes to, what you give your energy to, what you give your heart to, that's where you end up going. And so the dark side of this participatory world is that sometimes, without even knowing it, individually and entire groups of people, groupthink can begin to take over, and we can slip into these bad habits where everything is a criticism. And we feel like it's our job to sit back and to be a critic. And yet what I want to say is that that is easy. It's easy to take that path and to be a critic and to fall into this kind of criticulous mindset where everything we see isn't good enough, and yet what we think about, we bring about. And how damaging that can be to our own life, to our team, to the project that we're serving, to the people around us. If all we start to see is clouded by this nothing is good enough, that eventually begins to show up in our lives and certainly in our work and in our mindset. But where we look is where we go. And so we have to be able to shift our thinking and move us in a different direction. A recent psychological study chronicled in a Huffington Post article said that the average person has 16,000 thoughts a day, and yet 75% of them have a negative slant. What does this mean to the way we view our own life? What does this mean for the way that we view our own work? What does this mean for the way that we view our own children, our siblings, our neighbors, those that are different than us in the world? And yet we know the effectiveness and productivity of our business, our team, our relationships, our whatever it is that you're passionate about in the world. All of it is tied to our mindset and the culture that we create around the way we think, act, and interact. And yet if we slip and fall into this criticulous mindset, all of a sudden the habits we start to form are of that negative slant where nothing is really good enough. It's okay to be critical every once in a while, and certainly to have a constructive ideas for improvement. All of us that are in that are trying to improve and stimulate progress for ourselves personally, but then certainly for the projects and for the teams and organizations that we're working on, the things that we're passionate about. Of course, I talk about this all the time, that we need to bring a mindset of continuous improvement and always trying to learn from where we've been to get stronger and make us better at what we do. Of course, but that's constructive progress, which is different than an excessive criticism just for the sake of being a critic. That, in fact, is hollow. Criticism just for the sake of being a critic is hollow. It's easy. And it certainly doesn't stimulate progress. It stymies progress. So in this criticulous world that we live in right now, and how easy it is to fall in that trap and that path of going down, knowingly or unknowingly, these habits of having that criticulous mindset, we need to be proactive about making sure that every time we catch ourselves going down that path, that we shift our thinking, acting, and interacting to shift that where we look is where we go, and make sure we fix our eyes back on what are positive, constructive ideas, what are solutions, and instead of blame, how do we take personal ownership over finding those solutions together? So a few reflection questions and some things for us to step back and ponder for this week. I invite you to think about these questions for your own life, for your work, and for the things that you're passionate about in the world, in your journey. In what areas of your life do you tend to slip into critic mode? All of us are human, so we all have the habit and can fall into these traps, but are there areas of your life that you tend to slip into that critic mode? What thoughts do you want to remember, or reminders to get you looking in another direction? What do you need to remember so that when you find yourself slipping into that criticulous mindset, that mindset of a critic that shifts your looking and gets you looking in a different direction and going down that path of positivity, of support, of solutions and ownership? And what areas of your relationships, your work, or your life need further examination for possible constructive improvements? And what past criticisms are trivial and just need to be let go of? What are those areas where there are constructive improvements to be made? And yet, what are those hollow, those shallow criticisms from your past or even your current situation that are trivial and just need to be let go of because it's a false narrative that's leading you down that path of a criticulous mindset? This is a reminder to flip our own mindset, that all of us are human and we all slip into these patterns, but to flip our own mindset, to choose the path of positivity, solutions-based thinking, rather than the easier path of negativity and being a critic. What you think about, you bring about. Where you look is where you go. So where are you choosing to look? Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast platform or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of this conversation. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or this kind of development would add value to your team or organization, we hope you'll contact us at www.jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we all are ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.